We're going to pick up where we left off with Chapter 3 and how can we reduce manufacturing pollution. So listen and follow along, and I'll stop and ask you a few questions as well. Chapter 3, Water Pollution. Like the air we breathe, water is essential for life. Some manufacturing processes use water too. Fabric and paper manufacturing are two examples. This machine uses water to make paper out of wood pulp. What other manufacturing processes use water? Factories sometimes send polluted water into lakes and rivers. But these processes use more than water. They also use chemicals, including benzene and chlorine. Some of these harmful materials get into the water during manufacturing. Afterward, the leftover water has to be disposed of. Some of it is poured into rivers or kept in storage ponds. Polluted water may also drain into sewers. Older cities often have combined sewer systems. That means a factory's wastewater will mix with rain runoff from the city's gutters in a single sewer pipe. In heavy rains, these sewers can overflow. The polluted water then flows into nearby rivers, lakes, or oceans. A sewer overflows after a large storm. Firefighters tried to put out a fire on the Cuyahoga River in 1952. What effect does water pollution have? Chlorine and benzene can poison drinking water. These chemicals are also harmful to fish and other wildlife. For example, the Cuyahoga River in Cleveland, Ohio became very polluted in the mid-1900s. Chemicals had been dumped into the river for decades. No fish could survive. The pollution got so bad that the river caught fire. Have you heard any examples of water pollution other than the Cuyahoga River? If you haven't, something that you could Google is Flint, Michigan water pollution. That's not too far from us, and they have had a big problem with water pollution. Chemicals can also make rivers and lakes unsafe for swimming or fishing. Polluted water is hard to clean, and the cleaning process can be very expensive. A sign warns people that the water is too polluted for swimming. What are the solutions to water pollution? Cities are replacing combined sewer systems with separate sewer systems. That means factories have sewers that take wastewater to a plant to be cleaned first. Runoff has its own separate sewer. So I want you to stop and think about those techniques that the author is using, because you're going to look for some of them again today. And here, the author is giving a solution. What is the problem that they mentioned? And then what do they recommend to solve it? And how is it being solved? Do you see those techniques the author's using? Let's keep reading. At a wastewater treatment plant, water goes into settling tanks where pollutants are removed. The Clean Water Act of 1972 sets limits on what factories can release. It also requires that factories have a permit before releasing anything into a body of water. Companies face penalties for not having a permit. The EPA decides how much treatment of the water is necessary. Wastewater gets cleaned at a treatment plant and until it is safe enough to be released. The plant removes pollutants and disinfects the water. The Cuyahoga River has not had a fire since 1969. Water pollution remains a problem, but people are making progress. Rivers such as the Cuyahoga are much cleaner than they were 50 years ago. Today, bald eagles nest on the Cuyahoga's shores. Other fish and wildlife are starting to come back as well. Chapter 4, Soil Pollution. Soil pollution can happen all at once or slowly over time. The cause could be a large accidental spill of chemicals, or it could be a slow chemical leak from a storage tank. A train crash could cause chemicals to spill onto the soil. What is another way that soil can become polluted? Let's think about that. The cause could be a large accidental spill of chemicals or a slow chemical leak from a storage tank. So, what is another way that soil can become polluted? I'll ask you to share your thoughts on that after this in one of the quizzes. Think about what are ways that soil can become polluted. Many factories bury their waste, but sometimes this waste is not properly contained. When this happens, hazardous materials can leak into the soil. Soil pollution is also connected to air and water pollution. For example, pollution from the air can settle on land, harming the soil. Contaminated or polluted soil can also leak chemicals into underground water supplies. A factory illegally dumped these barrels full of toxic waste. Farmers' crops may become contaminated by toxic chemicals in the soil. Soil pollution effects. Polluted soil can cause a chain reaction. Toxic chemicals may prevent plants from growing in the soil. The plants that do grow are contaminated. Then humans or animals eat the contaminated plants. Also, kids could play in the dirt. When that happens, they may breathe it in or accidentally eat it. So people and animals can consume toxins without even knowing it. Think about what kind of plants maybe you've heard of that might be contaminated. You ever heard of plants being recalled? Maybe some vegetables being recalled for contamination? I'm thinking of romaine lettuce. Sometimes that gets recalled. If soil has contaminated the groundwater, that water is no longer safe to drink. Soil or water that has been polluted can cause health problems. Consuming water or food from contaminated soil can cause food poisoning in the short term. In the long term, it can cause cancer and birth defects. A scientist takes a soil sample to test for pollution. Soil pollution solutions. Like air pollution and water pollution, soil pollution is hard to clean up, but there are a few ways it can be done. After the soil is dug up, it can be treated with chemicals and replaced. It can also be disposed of. Usually this means burning the soil or safely burying it, but this solution is not perfect. Burning the soil can put the pollution into the air instead. Contaminated soil is put into bags. It will be carried away and burned. Pumpkin plants can suck toxins out of the dirt. They were used to clean up polluted soil near a factory that made markers. Sometimes soil can be cleaned in place. Scientists have ways of breaking down harmful substances to safe levels. This process uses natural organisms that attack the pollutants. Scientists are also doing experiments with certain plants that absorb chemicals. The pollution can also be contained so it will not hurt anything. But this does not clean the soil at all. If the containers break, pollution happens all over again. All these methods have problems. It is difficult to clean up the soil without creating other pollution, and cleanup is expensive. Companies face fines for accidental spills. The best way to deal with soil pollution is to prevent it from happening in the first place. Manufacturers are now working harder to control waste and prevent accidents. Many car factories are now recycling their waste. Chapter 5. What can you do? Factories make lots of great products that people love, but it's important to know how manufacturing affects our environment. One person alone cannot control how companies do their manufacturing, but together people can have a big impact on what companies make and how they make it. I want you to stop right there after that paragraph and think to yourself, what is the author trying to convince me of right now? The author has a very strong bias in this paragraph. Bias doesn't have to be a bad thing, doesn't have to be a good thing, it's just their opinion. So what is that author's bias? What's their opinion in this paragraph? I hope you said something like factories are a good thing, but it is important to know how they can harm the environment and to work to prevent it. That's what this author is wanting us to do, and now they're about to tell us how to do it. Workers assemble electronics in a factory. How can people reduce the amount of pollution factories create? Start by trying to reduce the amount of stuff you buy. If people buy less stuff, companies will make less stuff. That means factories will use less energy and create less pollution. One way to buy less stuff is to reuse products. Rather than buying new items, try to reuse things until they wear out. You can also borrow things from friends instead of buying new items. Consider using secondhand sports equipment instead of buying new items. Many things can be recycled, including plastic, glass, metal, and paper. Recycling is another way to reduce manufacturing pollution. For example, it takes less energy to make cans and bottles from recycled materials than to make new ones, so it's a good idea to recycle whenever you can, whatever you can. You might be surprised how many products can be made from recyclable materials. Fleece jackets and carpet can be made from flat plastic bottles. Soup cans can be turned into parts for bikes or cars. Of course, sometimes you have to buy new things. When you do, choose products made from recycled materials if possible. You can also look for products with less packaging. More packaging means more energy was used to produce it. Instead of buying foods packaged in plastic and styrofoam, look for foods that are sold without packaging. What are other ways that you can reduce or use less packaging? And do you recycle at home? Is there recycling near you? Think about how you could start if you're not. That's what this author is persuading us to do. And I would argue this is a good thing to do, right? We want to help our environment. We don't want to live in a world where we have to wear masks all the time, even when it's not COVID, right? Like those people did in our story, in this part of this text yesterday, because the air pollution was so bad. It also helps to stay informed. Be sure to buy products from companies that manufacture responsibly. One thing to look for is the Forest Stewardship Council, or FSC, logo. It means the product was made responsibly. One product you can find it on is paper. Paper factories use a lot of water and chemicals. The FSC logo means the manufacturer protected the environment while making that paper. A worker puts the FSC logo on a tree trunk. Talking to your friends is a great way to get others involved. You can also ask an adult for help. Stay involved with environmental events around you. Help clean up a polluted site and tell others about what they can do. The more we reduce manufacturing pollution, the brighter the future will be.